Hello and welcome to Witchy Wellness Radio. I'm your host, Lauren Chalantani, women's holistic health coach and fellow recovering perfectionist. This podcast was created to show you that your body is not in the way, it is actually leading your way. Hello, beautiful people. This is Lauren again, and you are listening to episode 79, Attachment Theory with Thais Gibson. Now, today's show is jam-packed with subconscious goodies. I even learned a lot with this episode. Thais is such a beautiful, intelligent, wise, and compassionate soul. But before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to take a second to say that today's episode is sponsored by Magnesium, Living the Good Life Naturally with Kristen Bowen. Episode 73 is where I interviewed the founder of this company, and I support this product so much that I am an affiliate for it. If you're interested, head over to episode 73, that's 73, or click on the link below and make sure to use code WITCHY, WICTHY, to get 10% off your offer. So we'll learn more about Thais in a second, but a short bio: she is an author, speaker, co-creator of the Personal Development School, and of course, she's extremely passionate about personal growth, the subconscious, and connecting it with others. In today's episode, you get to hear Thais' story of how she became the co-founder of the Personal Development School, attachment theory in all the different styles, how attachment theory impacts our romantic relationships, depression, anxiety, fear, hello 2020, self-sabotage, and the subconscious mind. How do our early childhood experiences affect our subconscious mind with attachment theory? What is the relationship between addiction and the subconscious? And how can we retrain our mind to transform any limiting program in each of the 7 areas of our lives, which are mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, relationships, career, and financial? And so much more. Please enjoy episode 79, Attachment Theory with Thais Gibson. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Witchy Wellness Radio. And again, I'm your host, Lauren Chalantani. And this is a show you get to learn your body is not in your way, but actually leading your way. And today we have the beautiful guest of Thais Gibson. She is an author, speaker, co-creator of the Personal Development School. She is extremely passionate, which you'll get to hear soon, about personal growth, the subconscious mind, yes, and connecting with others. With an MA and over 13 certifications ranging from CBT to hypnosis, Thais strives to continuously learn and grow. She is best known for her contributing work and research on attachment theory and the impact of attachment trauma on our adult romantic relationships. She overlaps this attachment trauma challenges with personal core wounds, limiting beliefs, and emotional patterns at the subconscious level to give us deeper insight to ourselves and our relationships. Her book, The Attachment Theory Guide, was written on this topic, and her YouTube channel often focuses on educating people on how to subconsciously reprogram this area of their lives. Love it. After overcoming her own challenges with addiction in her early years, she is profoundly determined to educate people on how they can reprogram painful or limiting programs in their own mind. She is focused on helping people retrain their brain to achieve relationship fulfillment and personal freedom in their lives. Wow, that is such a beautiful, beautiful bio. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. I know. I was like, reading your bio and looking into your school, I'm like, this is what Witchy Wellness is about. This is what I'm about. Learning to overcome anything in your life that, you don't have to be the victim of. And sometimes we don't realize that we are that victim, or, these subconscious beliefs are really controlling the show. And it's so powerful. There's actually a lot more research out there now than there used to be. I would love how you got into this field. I kind of left a little teaser in there. I'm sure there's a good story to where you got here today after 13 plus certifications and helping so many beautiful souls grow.
Yeah, so really it was personal for me, and obviously that's probably why I went so strongly into learning everything that I possibly could and doing all the certifications. But it sort of started for me as I definitely went through a lot of attachment trauma in childhood, and definitely like a lot of different traumas related to like my family, my home, like different things like that. Didn't really have awareness of it, didn't really have good tools, and just, was sort of taught to not show my emotions and press on and all these different things. And I think a big part of what I was hoping for was I was an athlete as well. So I played competitive soccer, and I was trying to get a soccer scholarship from Toronto, Canada to the US. And I think I also sort of at a subconscious level associated, like, I'll be free of some of the stuff that's going on in my life, and I'll sort of break free from it, and things like this, sort of leave the past behind of things I hadn't processed. But then I, in one of my scouting years, had a knee surgery that was pretty intense, and became addicted to my painkillers directly after that. And I think it was really this frightening journey for me. Like, I didn't even know. I remember going through my first experience of like withdrawals and not even really knowing what was happening. Like, I was like, what's going on? Like, why do I feel like this? And so from a really young age, not only did I struggle with addiction, but I also at the same time, like, didn't want to live like that. I was this student that did well in school and this athlete, and I had lots of friends. And all of a sudden it was like, what's going on? Like, I can't break free of this thing. And it started to really run my life. And so I would journal at night. I would like write down, like, there was a girl I was getting them from at school, and I'd be like, I'm going to go down this hallway and avoid her. And I'm going to do this. And I would try to write all these things to myself. And like, or I'd be like doing the painkillers, and I'd be like, okay, this is the last time. And, I just like always lose this battle with myself. And that was like that was probably the hardest part of addiction, I think, overall, is that it's just tormenting. Like, you tell yourself, I'm going to do this, I'm going to break free. And you keep going back down that same path. And then I was still pretty high functioning. I did get a soccer scholarship. And then in one of my years at school, in one of my classes, I was going to school for psychology. Somebody said to me, oh yeah, well, it's because the conscious mind can't outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. And in this like monumental moment, somebody had just explained my, like, at this point, like 5 or 6 year struggle of like every day hitting my head against the wall, being like, I'm going to stop, and then losing the battle. And it just was like so earth shattering for me, because it was like, oh my goodness, like, I've been searching for this. I've been trying tools. I'd reached out to help. I had done the rehab thing already in the summer. Like, I had tried so many different things, and things were not working. And it was like, let me learn about this. So that became probably like my new addiction, is I became obsessed with learning about the subconscious mind. And I realized I had all these unresolved traumas, especially related to relationships, attachment, interactions that I saw growing up, things I was exposed to. And it was like, okay, if I can heal that stuff, no wonder my subconscious mind is doing painkillers. It's trying to numb pain that I'm carrying inside of me and storing at a subconscious level and not realizing. And so I learned a lot from that point forward, spent like all of my free time immersing myself in that. And I didn't heal. I didn't get sober overnight. I still like had to do a whole bunch of different things and show up in a whole bunch of different ways. But over time, I actually, like, on my own, and I'm not saying that this is what everybody should do or anything like that, but on my own, applying different tools and doing different reprogramming techniques and working through some of my trauma and all these sorts of things, I was able to get sober and have a really, really healthy relationship to myself for the first time in my life, probably ever. And then that turned into finished school, went through all these certifications, launched a practice, had a 2-year wait list within the first few months of starting it. And then was like, how do I scale this so I can see more people? And about, the better part of a decade in eventually put together an online personal development school. So that's the whole journey. Hopefully that wasn't too long, but that was all of it.
No, never too long. I know this is the abridged, shorter version of it. Yeah, I knew there was some powerful story behind this, because you were one determined lady. And I think that's how we really do learn, and we do make that change. There is something that wakes us up something, that little idea thought bubble that I don't want to say hope, but it gives you this different perspective than you thought you had. It's almost like oh, I really do have a problem, but I can change. And we do talk some subconscious stuff on the show, but I would love to hear your version of, let's start fundamental here, and we'll work our way up through all the beautiful things that you teach. What is the subconscious, and why is it controlling our day-to-day conscious thoughts and actions?
Yeah, great question. So you can sort of think of basically we have our conscious mind. And if you imagine like there's an original diagram of this iceberg, and it's like a Freud picture from years ago. Most people have seen it. And you can think of your conscious mind as being the tip of the iceberg, what's exposed above the water. And so that takes up roughly 3 to 5% of our daily actions, thinking, feelings, behavior. And then when we look below the iceberg at that huge piece underneath, in order, in a sense, we sort of have like our pre-conscious mind, which is a very small sort of, you can think of it as being where the water hits up against the iceberg and is sometimes obscured, but sometimes the water level's below. Just in that little area is your pre-conscious. And then you have your subconscious, and the much deeper parts are your unconscious. And so our sub and unconscious collectively are basically taking up roughly 95 to 97% of our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our behaviors. And they're basically a big set of subconscious programs that we learn and we store. And we store all of our programming in there. And then this basically becomes the filter that we see the world through. And so I often give people the example, if you can imagine you have like Tom and Bob. And let's say Tom and Bob think that they're going to like some kind of retreat, and they go into this big space and it's an auditorium. And let's say they both walk up to the door and they open it, and they're both standing at the same door, and they see the whole auditorium is full of women only. And let's say we look for a moment at Tom's history, and maybe he grew up in a household where he had lots of great experiences with women, close to his mom, got along with his sisters, healthy relationships, female friends. And then let's say we have Bob, and let's say Bob had a horrible relationship to his mom, fought with his sisters, unhealthy romantic relationships. Tom and Bob are going to stand at that doorway, and they're going to have totally different emotional experiences subjectively, even though they're both being exposed to the exact same objective reality. And it's because we all see the world through a filter of our past programming. And so one of the things that this lady said to me one time when I was in rehab, she said, genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. And I remember thinking, okay, so you're telling me I'm helpless because I had all this addiction that ran in my grandparents. And they say alcoholism, addiction skips a generation. And then at least the research at the time did. And then I was thinking, and environment, I had like a lot of traumas growing up. So I'm thinking, you're telling me I'm basically like, this is it. Like genetics, I didn't do well, environment not working out for me. And I remember I couldn't like sit with that. I was like, I don't want to just be the product of my genetics and my experiences. Like there has to be something else in our humanness that's worth more than that can do something more than that. And I realized it's your genetics loads the gun and your perception of the environment pulls the trigger. And our perception, that little middle piece that determines how we perceive the world, is all of the subconscious programming we have. And if we can dive into that and we can start to find the programs that are limiting us, that are not serving us, and we can learn proper tools to reprogram them, we literally change the way we see our environment, we feel in our environment. And then even recent studies on epigenetics says that our perception even has the ability to shift the expression of our genes in real time, which is just some pretty wild stuff to think about. So.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I've said this before on the show. I recently read a study. I can't remember where it is. I'll have to pull it up. But where a traumatic event, or it could be positively or negative traumatic event, can affect epigenetically up to 7 generations down.
Wow.
So think about the healing work that you do. That can positively affect 7 generations down, which just blows my mind.
Crazy.
And I know this, but I'd love to hear your take and more information. And a lot of people don't understand that a lot of our if not all of our subconscious mind is built in childhood. These misbeliefs. So How does this happen? How do our early childhood experiences actually affect, or also subconscious, but also the attachment effect, which is what I wanted to lead to next?
Yes. Okay. So amazing question. So research shows that the first 3 years of our lives are the most impactful. But then second to the first 3 years are ages 3 to 8. So basically we're in a state of that time period of our lives of being in a hyper state of suggestibility. AKA our brain at that time period is producing mostly alpha and theta brain waves during our waking time, which are basically the brain waves that we need to be hypnotized. So you can think of like basically somebody from the ages of 0 to 8 is in a state of hypnosis. And it's not exactly like that, but think of it as like hypersuggestibility, like a very close cousin of hypnosis. And so this is absolutely where we get most of our programs. Now, the language of the subconscious is emotion and imagery. And we can be exposed to things in a very short period of time that if there's a strong enough emotional component can change our programming. And our programming can also change at any point in life. So we can be, for example, exposed to really good childhood memories and experiences and have a really safe household. But then maybe, you're 17 and you have your first long-term relationship and maybe there's some really tough things that you're exposed to then. That can change the imprinting and can affect that whole childhood component of programming. And this is because we have neuroplasticity and the brain is rewiring itself at all times. But when we have programming that we didn't like growing up or things that, may not be serving the highest expression of us currently, when we can learn to isolate what these things are and we can get clear about like, what are the stories in here? That's when we can start pulling things out and go, okay, how can I plug these into reprogramming tools? And something that's so interesting is we often see people when they're trying to do reprogramming work, they try to use their conscious mind to speak a language that the subconscious doesn't speak. And it's because the subconscious doesn't really speak linguistically, like it doesn't really speak in words. So it speaks literally in images and emotion. So if it would be like, I speak, Spanish and I'm trying to have a conversation with you and you speak English and I'm trying to do reprogramming work and I'm not like, it's not going to reach you. And so we have to be able to recognize that when we want to reprogram, we really have to not just do something like say an affirmation. We have to look for pieces of evidence to support that affirmation because evidence is basically a memory. Like if we say, I'm good enough because, I got that award or I finished that piece of education that I was doing or whatever it might be, that actually contains a memory. So when we have evidence, we see the images of us doing that. And research shows that all memory is colored with emotion. So when we're trying to reprogram, part of like the really strong, important components are we getting clear, A, on what we are reprogramming? And then we can talk about how to find that out in a minute too. And B, can we get really clear about that we have to alter that program by opposing it in our belief system? So if it's I'm unlovable, okay, I'm lovable is the opposite. And here are my pieces of evidence for why. And if we rinse and repeat that and engage by like thinking of memories and pieces of proof that have that emotional component, research shows it takes only 21 days to create a full new program that reaches our subconscious. And it only takes 63 days to create a new program that reaches our unconscious mind. So that's almost impossible to debunk unless we're doing a lot of work to do so consciously and intentionally and repetitively over time. So that program is very likely to stay very long term.
And for me, a few years ago, I started learning about law of attraction and all this kind of stuff and subconscious programming. I 100% agree. Affirmations do not work if you are not doing the work to clear all the limiting beliefs that, you might say it, but you might not actually believe it. And the things that you want to manifest or change about yourself, it's not about obtaining that end result. It's about how you want to feel in that future state. And it perfectly pairs with like what you just said about there's all these emotions always tied to a memory. Yes. And what's even more powerful is that there's research that if you think about a memory and that emotion, your brain cannot tell the difference between it happening in real life emotionally versus in your head. But that can be used in a positive way as well. I don't want, it's not just doom and gloom here.
Exactly. And what's actually happening is that's when we think of something like I know the study you're talking about saying that we can't really tell the difference between what's real and imagined. And that's because when we are imagining something, we're basically, whether we're consciously fully present or not, in a sense, we're using one part of our mind, maybe our preconscious or conscious, to show imagery to our subconscious mind. And our subconscious mind will emote according to the images we give it. And then that feeling creates a state. And then then that ties into everything else that you just talked about. Right. And so we have to take really good care of like what's happening at the autopilot level throughout the course of our day, on what we're visualizing, what we're feeling, what we're thinking about that's eliciting those responses, because all of those things, like there's this wonderful quote in something called A Course in Miracles, and it says, there are no idle thoughts. And it's true, because all of our thoughts are programming us one way or the other, either towards what we do want, what we're hoping for, what we'd like to create, how we'd like to feel, or programming us to see, feel, experience more problems on a daily basis. And so we have to take such good care of that mental inventory, or that space. And one of the things that was really profound for me on like my whole healing journey is, one thing I started doing is meditating. And this is like a little excessive, but I had a lot of healing to do. I would meditate for like 3 or 4 hours a day for a solid couple of years in there. And a lot of that time I would spend just observing my thoughts, just trying to understand like, what were these programs that were running? And that's one of the beautiful parts of meditation, is in a sense, when those autopilot thoughts surface and they start coming up and trying to pull you out of being present or focusing on your breath or doing whatever you're doing in meditation, those autopilot thoughts are basically a direct reflection of your stories, your programs that you carry. And so I often say to people, like, when you want to do that self-observation and not have to meditate for 3 or 4 hours, what you can do is you can write a list of all of the 7 areas of your life. So career, financial, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and relationships, which can be broken down into like friends, family, and romantic. And you can ask yourself, like, what are the painful stories I carry here? What are the patterns I notice? What am I afraid of here? And you can just do some digging on some of the patterns that show up in those areas. And you can also ask yourself, what do I wish I had in all these areas? And why haven't I achieved this already? And you're going to see that you go, oh, I wish I could start my own business, but I don't have enough time. Or, okay, there's your limiting program. Or, oh, I wish I could save more money, but I have to pay for this, this, and this. And we'll see some of those limiting stories that come up. So the fears that you carry, the patterns you have, the things that are painful, or that last question where we try to like say, what do we want? Why don't we have it yet? Those will all help to surface at a conscious level some of the subconscious programs. And then we can actually plug in some of those tools we were starting to discuss about reprogramming, where you like oppose it, find 10 to 15 pieces of evidence, especially in a suggestible state. It's called autosuggestion, when we're first awake in the morning for about an hour, or after meditation, after we're in that trance-like relaxed state. We can plug in some of those reprogramming tools to those limiting programs that we have, and we can start to really speed up that process for ourselves.
Beautiful. I knew you were a fellow meditator. I would love to do that every day, but it's not real. It's not real life. I meditate for at least 30 minutes a day. If not, like, something's wrong. And, I tell people, like, you think after the years of me meditating that every meditation is just a perfect meditation. That's a lie. It's quite the opposite, right? It is a fast, like, direct connection to what's going on up here. It's exactly what it is. And for me to finally get that about 1.5 to 2 years ago, I was at a meditation retreat, and I was like, I've meditated for years. Like, I should have a mystical experience. I should have some, mind-blown experience. Why am I not? I'm just stuck in my head. But that actually was the most transformational part for me, because these programs were so freaking loud and they wouldn't be quiet, and it was so clear. So what I like to do is when those thoughts come up, I'm like, thank you. It's just like giving me an easy button. Like, here's what's wrong. Like, here's where you need to dig into. And, and for me, it's a discipline problem, right? And when I'm meditating or just sitting down to do it, and not a bad way, I'm not being mean to myself, but it's like, all right, I know that's what you have to say, but refocusing, refocusing and letting go and deeper into the meditation. And that, I mean, that's what works for me. People, you can express it in runner's high when people like to run,
Yes.
that post yoga bliss. It's just when you become so present,
Yes.
all of that gunk that you're carrying around in your subconscious and conscious mind is just not there. And that's who we really are. I mean, that's why I wanted to start this show, is to help have beautiful people on like you. We're all really talking about the same thing, but there's so many ways to get there. There's so many ways to uncover and heal and teach. It's just so much fun. I have so much fun sitting back listening to everybody like you.
I agree. And I love that. I have this little theory. It's not like a real theory. It's just like a little thing I wonder about sometimes. And I wonder, like, almost everything we do, I think, is some kind of subconscious strategy to literally get free of our mind. Like, if we see people in more pain, oh, they drink lots of alcohol or do all these, or we try to fall in love and we want all that connection. I think everything that we're seeking is just some form of like seeking the divine, but just in a different form than is maybe the most direct version. And when we're more direct about how we get our needs met or what we're moving towards, I think more beautiful things unfold and life becomes a little simpler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed. We got a little off on a tangent there, but I wanted to we got through the subconscious, but I wanted to hear more about, the attachment theories and what that how that relates to the subconscious and everything that you do.
Yeah. So people love hearing about this, I find, because it's like very personal to everybody. And so I guess the way I'll try to explain it will be the different attachment styles that exist so people can see, because we all have an attachment style, period, whether we know it or not. And so basically attachment theory was originally John Bowlby's work. And it's been around for quite some time, but a lot more recently, a lot of people have dug deeper into the research and sort of the practical application of attachment theory and sort of some of the different components that are there. So part of the work that I have done is we created something called integrated attachment theory. So it's basically this idea that it started when I was seeing a lot of people in my practice. When I first started my practice, I was seeing like 40 or so people a week, which is a lot for like your traditional person in my role. We'll see like 12 a week. And I probably had like some boundary issues to work on then, but I kept sort of telling myself like, oh, but I've healed so much. I'm so okay. Like everybody needs help. And anyways, I had to go through my own learning there as well. But one thing that was so interesting about doing that is that I saw so many patterns in people. Like you would just see, you're exposed to that many people, that inside their life time after time. And eventually you just keep hearing like the same stories in this version of the person and then in that version. You start to really put these links together. And so it was really interesting because I was doing a lot of work in my practice with people on the subconscious, removing limiting beliefs, all these different things, and a lot around like trauma, things they hadn't forgiven, everything from like sexual trauma to physical trauma, all these different things. And then I started really digging a little more into attachment theory, and I learned about it in school, but I started really like doing a bit of a deep dive. And I realized that all these things I was working on with people showed up very much interlinked with attachment styles. So there are 4 main attachment styles. And what I realized is each attachment style tends to have the very similar, if not like, very, very similar, we'll say, patterns of core wounds, like painful limiting beliefs that they tend to be carrying, emotional patterns. So for example, some people will experience a lot more loneliness, anxiety, fear of being isolated, worrying about what other people think, insecurity. Other people are experiencing more anger, helplessness, frustration. Like literally attachment styles have certain emotions they tend to experience, as well as needs and what they expect in a relationship and ways that they communicate love. And so it's amazing because when you start finding all these things, you go, it's like these people are playing, you imagine like you and I are playing a board game and we're playing with a different rule book. Like there's going to be all these unnecessary challenges. And that's what's happening with people who have different attachment styles trying to be in a relationship together. They have this totally different subconscious set of rules that they're playing by. And so there are 4 main attachment styles. The first one is secure. The secure one's what we all want. It's what we're all trying to move towards. It's what you heal towards and is the ultimate goal. The securely attached person usually gets a lot of positive experiences in their childhood. So things like their needs being met regularly, their feelings being held space for and nurtured, and as a byproduct of being a child that grows up in a home where you feel consistently nurtured and you feel like your feelings can be heard, you inherently believe that you're worthy of love because you go, I get love in the way that I receive love just for being me, just for existing, not because I do something or because I show up in a certain way, but just as I am. So a secure child, because of some of these dynamics of having that consistent emotional nurturing, care, needs being met, grows up to naturally have a better time with relationships. They feel more trusting. They feel more worthy. They're naturally more confident. They feel safer around people as a whole. And then they grow up to feel like, it's safe to express feelings and safe to open up and be vulnerable and to express their needs and you get their needs met by others and receive, and vice versa. And so I would say, certain tests show a certain percent of people are secure. I would say that a lot of people are self-reporting and there's not a tremendous amount of secure people overall. A fair portion, but not too many. And then we look at the 3 other insecure attachment styles. And these are all individuals who experience a consistent enough form of attachment trauma that it puts them into an insecurely attached space. So on one end of the continuum, we have dismissive avoidance, and dismissive avoidance in their childhood basically gets some form of emotional neglect. And it can be like really intensive emotional neglect where they also have physical neglect, or it can be under the radar emotional neglect where, their needs are met and the parents are nice and safe and, stable and meet, dinner's on the table, clothes are there, everything is met in that form, but there's no emotional availability. And in fact, maybe you get shamed for your emotions, like, oh, big boys don't cry, children should be seen and not heard, those sorts of messages. And so the dismissive avoidant basically grows up in their adult life to have a certain set of core beliefs and rules for how they relate. And so they will often carry a huge shame wound around vulnerability. They will often feel really unsafe being vulnerable because it was usually met with some form of consistent emotional rejection growing up. And a child, when they're exposed to emotional neglect, they don't have the ability yet to go, oh, my parents are emotionally unavailable. Instead, they go, something must be wrong with me. I must be defective at my core. And so they grow up and they have a lot of shame. They don't want people to see them. They compensate by being very protective of their own space, their own boundaries. They self-soothe. They do not let other people help them soothe. And they get afraid of commitment. They get afraid of closeness. They get afraid of being too connected. And so this is our individual that grows up and is afraid of relationships and is the commitment phobic person or shut down and doesn't want to open up. And, some people get a bad rap for stuff like that, but it's usually just rooted in trauma. And so that's one end. And then we have the other end of the attachment spectrum, which is our anxious preoccupied. And anxious preoccupied individuals basically have the exact opposing wounds. So they basically grow up and they have a lot of positive emotional associations programmed in about connection because it feels good. They usually have loving, good parents, but there's some kind of inconsistency that creates a perceived abandonment. So it could be that mom and dad are both really loving, but they work a lot. It could be that mom's really loving, but dad's a little cold and distant, and that inconsistency there creates a perceived abandonment. And basically this individual over time gets a lot of programs that say you could be emotionally abandoned or physically abandoned at any point in time. So this individual grows up to have major abandonment fears, and they usually have core wounds around, I will be abandoned, I will be alone, I will be excluded, disconnected, rejected, I'm not good enough. And they have a lot of insecurity in their relationships, and they really try to consistently bond, get closer. They will do anything to keep, bonding and getting closer with somebody. And then, of course, often our dismissives and our anxious attract each other in relationships. And so we have one person who's like, I will be trapped if I get too close. And one person's like, I need to get close right now and every moment of the day. And so we have these really challenging dynamics that can come about for what people expect in relationships and what they need. And then very lastly, we have our fearful avoidance, who basically experience both sides of the attachment continuum there. So they have the anxious side, and they do fear abandonment and being left alone and excluded and things like this. But they also have the avoidance side where they have I will be trapped, I will be helpless. I don't want to be too vulnerable. And largely this is because this individual in childhood has some kind of consistent enough trauma where the caregivers are really unpredictable. So let's say, for example, and it can be many different things, but maybe mom is an alcoholic, let's pretend. And so the child goes, well, I really love mom, and sometimes I feel really good connecting to her, but I can never tell, like, is she safe to connect to today? Or is she going to be drinking? Or is she going to, and so the child becomes very hypervigilant. And basically they get programmed with really strong competing associations. Like, I really want love and it feels good, but I'm terrified of it at the same time. And so they have a really big trust wound is like one of the fundamental factors about their attachment style is they want love, but they really don't know how to trust because it wasn't really shown to them by their caregivers. So that becomes our model for what we see that through the filter of going into the outside world. And this individual will be the person in their adult lives that's like, come here. And you're like close, you're like, get back, stay away. And they're always like hot and cold and the pendulum swinging and very ambivalent. And they have a hard time like trusting, settling into relationships, having just the ability to relax in relationships and be open to sort of moving through the stages and life cycle of a relationship. And so those are our 4 different attachment styles. Everybody has those individual unique wounds and core beliefs. But reprogramming those and meeting our unmet needs and showing up to set boundaries, understand ourselves, self-soothe, we can do these different things that actually reprogram our attachment style as a whole so we can all get to that secure place.
Beautiful. I know, listening to that, I'm like, yeah, definitely been there and have been with somebody on the opposite of that, of that spectrum. But it's good to, you might be listening and be like, ooh, that might be me now, or wow, like that used to totally be me, but I might be more, closer to the healthy side of that spectrum, because that is so powerful. I mean, just that very brief introduction to all those types, and you can relate and see yourself. And especially in adult relationships, it's probably easier to see people in past relationships and see their true colors than probably where you are right now. But wow, I'm like blown away between this. So
I try to go into like the details a little so people have that like framework, because most people will be able to resonate quite quickly with oh, that was me, or that's my ex, or that's my mom, or like, yeah.
So we have all these attachment styles, and we touched briefly on how to reprogram your subconscious, because I know, we might be in a relationship, we might be single, but regardless, we probably want to heal. If we're listening to Witchy Wellness Radio, chances are you're a seeker. You are on this personal growth path. Could you dive into maybe a few examples of how to reprogram and move towards more of a healthy attachment style?
100%. So some of the things we always want to start with is our beliefs or our stories and our needs. And so in the words of Dr. Gabor Mate, he says trauma is 2 things: the things that happened that shouldn't have happened. So that could be like verbal abuse, physical abuse, or the things that didn't happen that should have happened. So that could be like emotional neglect. You should have had the emotional nurturing, didn't get it. That in and of itself, the absence of what we needed, is a trauma. And so this really boils things down in terms of like how we can start reprogramming. And I find the 2 biggest sort of cruxes to start off with are: what traumas did we go through in childhood? What pain points did we go through? And what stories did we tell about ourselves because of those traumas? Because that's how trauma actually sticks at the subconscious level. That's why if somebody's 30 and they still have this, pain point from being 7 years old, well, how is it still here? That was, 23 years ago. I'm not the numbers person. That was 23 years ago. And so we have to be able to ask ourselves, okay, so how did that happen? Well, what's actually happened for a trauma to stay alive is we had to have that imprint because of a really painful experience. We had to give that imprint meaning. And then we've been telling that story on autopilot over and over again, firing and wiring those same neural pathways without realizing. So we've actually kept ourselves in a state of re-traumatization relative to all the traumas we've been through. And that's actually how trauma is still here presently from the past if we find that there's something there showing up for us. And so basically reprogramming is all about ending re-traumatization, because neural pathways atrophy over time, just kind of like muscles do. And so when we can start recognizing that and finding, okay, what meaning did we give these painful events in our lives? So maybe, maybe parents split up, and maybe you made it mean I was bad. I wasn't a good enough kid. Or maybe you made a big mistake and didn't go to the school you wanted to go to after high school. And maybe you made that mean, well, I'm not smart enough, or I'm not good enough. We have to find like traumas, big or small, whatever has impacted us. And we have to find what stories we told because of them. And so when we can do that, then we can plug those stories into the reprogramming tools, which is basically, like we talked about, get into a suggestible state where you are, first hour in the morning or last hour before bed, you're producing more alpha and theta brain waves. And then you can start opposing those beliefs and going, okay, I'm smart enough because, and we're looking for 10 to 15 pieces of evidence. It doesn't even matter how big or small they are. It just matters that you do the work. And anything that elicits an emotional response is what we're looking for. And the more emotion we can have, the faster the imprint takes shape, and the more we fire and wire those new neural pathways, and that old idea, those old neural pathways atrophy over time. So that's what we can do on that side. And then the other really interesting and often overlooked place that we stay in re-traumatization is we have to ask ourselves, what were the biggest unmet needs from our childhood? And then we have to ask ourselves, and how are we still not meeting those needs in the relationship to ourselves? Or how are we not advocating for those needs in the relationships to others? Or lastly, how do we block ourselves from receiving those needs in our relationships to others? And you're probably going to find, if you haven't been doing work around that specific area, you have one or all three of those patterns. And so we can say, like, maybe you look and you go, oh my gosh, this big unmet need I had was to be seen, or to be protected, or to be heard by people I loved and understood. Like, there can be so many different varieties of what the needs were that we're really missing. But then if we look, we have to go, okay, am I hearing myself now? Am I seeing myself? Am I protecting myself? And what I've found without exception is that if we are really good at meeting those needs that we didn't get met then, we do not hurt over them anymore. We're not hurt and sour over not being protected 10 years ago if we became great at protecting ourselves. Now we usually look back and we go, oh, that was amazing. That propelled me into becoming this really strong person today. Or, oh, I wasn't seen in childhood, and that's why I do the work I do today, and I totally feel seen. Or that's why I became such a good communicator. So if we've overcome them, we value those traumas because we see the trajectory they took us on. If we haven't healed from the lesson yet, then they're still going to show up and be impacting us as a trauma now. And that's a golden nugget to extract. That's a piece of feedback that, hey, if you still are hurt about those needs not being met, you still have some healing to do in terms of meeting those needs in the relationship to yourself and asking for them to be met and receiving them from others. So those are some really good places to start.
100%. And we always say that in our household, if the healing has occurred when you can look back with gratitude.
Yes.
For where you are today. And that was one of the first things that my partner and I connected over. And we're like, oh, this person is like kind of going on. Like they understand this. They've gone through some stuff, but now they're here and they're grateful because it all brought them here. Like some thumbs up. But that's just one area of life, right? Relationships, even though it can feel like a lot, good or bad. We touched on this a little bit. How can we retrain our mind or to transform any limiting belief in each of the 7 areas of life? So that's the mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, relationships, career, and financial. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, I have my notes somewhere. Where'd they go?
Yeah, so that's the work is we can look through those same patterns we were talking about with like what patterns show up in our career, what patterns show up in our finances, what patterns show up. And when we isolate them, I always say to people, like a lot of people will say things to me like, it's hard to solve emotional problems. It's like, no. We just haven't been taught the tools to isolate them. As soon as we isolate them, everything becomes solvable. So when we can get really clear on what's happening, then we can go, okay, it's either a story I have about myself. So maybe we look at finances and maybe it's, it's hard to earn money. Maybe it's, oh, the world is too competitive. Maybe it's, I don't deserve. Maybe it's, I'll be greedy if I make money. what are our painful limiting beliefs and programs. Then we want to plug them in. There's like literally like 25 amazing reprogramming tools. But one of the first ones I always tell people, start off with auto suggestion. Like start off with that, like the thing we talk about, the finding the opposing belief, rinse, repeat with emotional pieces of evidence, 10 or 15 a day. So you plug that into the formula there, and you start to reprogram through doing that, those painful stories. And then the flip side of that, and it will always come down to needs and stories. Needs and stories are the only reasons we have any emotional pain whatsoever. So emotional pain comes because we have unmet needs, and that's really good. That's feedback. Pain has helped us survive for this long as a species, right? Pain, we had hunger pains and it was like, go get food, or we have physical pain, we're cold, okay, go find shelter. Like pain is feedback. It's there to serve us. It's there to make us move and grow and expand and change and adapt. And suffering is the story we tell about the needs. So we could have an unmet need for connection in life, and we could go, oh my gosh, I'm feeling disconnected. Maybe people are feeling isolated or things like this. But then if we go, oh, it's because I'm not interesting. It's because nobody wants to be my friend. Oh, it's because I'm never going to have friends or family, or it's because I'm going to be alone forever. Then we get into suffering. And suffering is the story we tell about the need not being met. And so when we can do that, when we can realize it's only ever unmet needs or painful stories, and when we can look at any of the 7 areas of life and go, okay, what's my story, or what are my multiple stories, and then reprogram them, or what are my unmet needs in these areas, and then how can I create a strategy to get these needs met? By doing just that, we are taking care of all those parts of our life, and we can really enable ourselves to heal and transform any pain or suffering that exists.
Amen. Amen. I think it's so powerful that you can do this, right? And there's so many beautiful people, and you have a whole school that helps teach you this. Like you said, there's over 25 ways to reprogram. So if you're like,
if you didn't like that one
for me, that's not going to work, because sometimes that ego or the limiting beliefs are like, that'll work for other people, but not me. That's one I've had to work through before.
Interesting. And that's where we want to remember, because some people will say to me too, things along those lines like, oh, it's hard to change. It's impossible to change. How do you know change is possible? Like, aren't we stuck this way? And it's like, you weren't born with most of the programs you have right now. You acquire them over time through repetition and emotion. And so from the same perspective, you can literally look at anything that's not serving you, and you can just apply the same thing that's been happening to your whole life on autopilot. Just apply it for the things that you want instead of on autopilot to acquire the things that you don't want. And so we are always being programmed. We're being programmed by the input we have on a weekly basis, what we're reading, what we're watching on television, what we're looking up on YouTube or social media. Like everything, our input eventually becomes a part of our programming. And so we have to take care of our mind, and we also have to know that reprogramming is completely possible. And in fact, it's happening on autopilot to us all the time if we're not aware.
100%. I want to hear more about your personal development school, because I know you've been like dropping all these like really powerful wisdom nuggets and tools, but you created a whole amazing school. Tell us about it. How do we get in touch with you? What is it all about?
Well, okay. So the school came about because I literally was like so busy with my practice, and I had a really good friend of mine who's like, you work so much, like you need to stop doing that and put things online and make your own life easier. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So we actually created the personal development school together, and we have a huge team there now, and it's amazing. And so we have about 38 different courses. So I've written all of them. We add one new one every single month. There are courses just on reprogramming the subconscious mind, courses on reprogramming your attachment style, setting boundaries, overcoming codependency and enmeshment, depression, anxiety, addiction, like you name it, there's probably a course. We put lots in there. And then they're all about 3 or 4 hours in length with like 20-page workbooks, like specifically all reprogramming tools for you. And then I do 4 live calls every single week in there with our community. And then we have attachment coaches who are in there, and they host socials and online events. And I think, I knew when I was on my journey, it was like, where are all the people out there that are doing this? And sort of wanting to seek out people. So we're trying to create that community in there for people as well. So that's at personaldevelopmentschool.com. And then I also have free YouTube content that I put out every single day. And that's Personal Development School Thais Gibson. And that also has a ton of free stuff for people if they're interested in learning more.
Amazing. I know I'm going to hit subscribe to YouTube after this as well. I love my good YouTube channel. It's like, I don't even watch like suspenseful movies anymore because I'm like, only high vibe content here, people. When I can't control it, yeah.
I swear I think about stuff like that. Like my partner, he's always watching like The Walking Dead and all these things. I'm like, you're programming yourself with some scary stuff. And he wakes up with like nightmares and stuff. I'm like, that there you go. That's what happens.
100%. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I just looked down at the clock. I'm like, of course, it's time to wrap it up. Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to kind of wrap up before we close the show for today?
No, I mean, that's everything. I would say, I remember you saying at the beginning, like, what's one thing at the end that you would tell people or something like this?
I'm going to ask in a second. So.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I mean, you can, yeah. Everybody.
I have nothing else except for that.
Well, you're ready to go. I'm glad you've done your homework. You are prepared. That's why I like prep people, because sometimes it throws people off guard. If you are a new listener to Witchy Wellness Radio or a seasoned one, we always close the show thanking our beautiful guests for not only showing up for themselves, but for all of us today. And I always ask, how may we, the listeners, as an act of gratitude, have be of service for you today as an act of gratitude in return. So Thais is ready to go.
Well, thank you. Okay, so my one thing that I would totally say, and this was something that personally helped me so much on my healing journey and was like a pivotal point of like healing and game changing, is I think we all go through like the punishment reward system of like good, bad, right, wrong. And then we enact that on ourselves in our internal dialogue all day. And I would say one of the most important things that I would love for everybody to do, that would make me so happy, is to practice being gentle and compassionate in the relationship to themselves and being really careful with how they speak to themselves and gentle in terms of how they treat themselves and inquire if they make a mistake instead of judge. And really just be patient and kind and compassionate. And so that is my one like message. And if everybody does that, that is beautiful for me. I'm very happy. So that's what I would end off with.
The world would be a different place. I will say that.
Yeah.
Simple, but very, very impactful. Thank you so much, Thais, for coming on the show today. I had such a fun time like listening and learning new things about the subconscious and attachment theory. I'm always blown away. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
And remember, open up, surrender, trust, and let your body lead the way.